We interrupt this podcast for this brief public service announcement.
We interrupt this program for an important news announcement.
Hello, friends. We're coming at you from the land of the free and the home of the brave. Made in America matters, so we are asking all red-blooded, true blue, red, white, and blue Americans to support one of our favorite U.S. American manufacturing companies, Leupold Optics. Just ask yourself, have you America today? If not, consider purchasing some new state-of-the-art shades from America's Leupold Optics. Support American manufacturing with a new pair of 6 shades from LeupoldShop.com. And right now, when you use the code Brian2020, you get a free shirt of your choice from Leupold. Might I recommend one of my favorite shirts at Leupold? This glorious American Eagle shirt, because freedom. The American spirit shines brightest when our backs are against the wall. Through wars, natural disasters, and economic collapses, we've always shown a sense of grit and ingenuity when it's needed most. It's the same self-reliant spirit Fred Leupold had when he started his Oregon-based company 113 years ago. And it's what keeps the factory performing in Oregon today. Friends, support American manufacturing, because communism sucks. Made in America matters more than ever, so we're asking all red-blooded, true blue, red and white and blue. Red and blue. That's right.
All joking aside, folks, we over here at Gritty love working with Leupold Optics. If you're in the market for a new spotting scope or maybe some binoculars, please consider checking out Leupold Optics. Or, if you're looking for a new pair of sunglasses for the 2020 season, check out LeupoldShop.com and use the code Brian2020. Links are going to be in the description. Thanks, folks. Back to the show.
Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and today my guest is Preston Ward, owner of Mountain Physio, physical therapist. Mm-hmm. Is that your kind of title there?
Yeah,
Is it doctor? Is it?
Yeah, doctor of physical therapy. So.
Doctor of physical therapy. So, got you on the show today, and today we're going to talk about something that a lot of archers have problems with, and that's shoulders. You know, they draw their bow. I assume it's their bow arm, their shoulder, their drawing arm that is usually the issue or whatnot. But I get people write in all the time that say, "Oh, I got to switch to a crossbow, or I had to really lower the poundage. I can't shoot my bow anymore." So I want to ask you today, what is causing these issues generally? What's the most common issues that you see? What are the remedies that you use to address those problems, and how can people move forward and prevent these things that haven't experienced it yet? How can they prevent it from ever happening at all? I don't have any issues at all.
Have you ever had any issues?
No.
Shooting your bow, you've never had any shoulder pain? No. Do you draw with a high arm, high elbow?
No.
You'll draw down here?
Yep.
Okay.
It's funny, like I draw my bow, I almost push with my left arm. Mm-hmm. So I anchor with my right, my shoulder kind of tucked in, ball in the socket, and I get in like this. You see how tight it is to my body, and I kind of push with my left arm because I can press a lot more than I can pull.
Okay.
You know, like it just feels like I'm doing. It's something I can repeat a million times and not hurt myself. So I anchor and I kind of push, and then as it gets almost out to break, then I pull. So I only pull for a little bit. Boom. Just right there at the end.
At the very end.
Mm-hmm. But I see guys put the bow out here. They stretch their arm straight forward. Now it's out of socket. I don't like that feeling. I don't like my arm compromised. I want my shoulder back here. For those that are watching, you can see what I'm talking about. But shoulders back here, I can grab it and I can pull through. I don't like that. Most guys I see round their shoulder, grab it, and pull from that compromised position. I don't like. For me, I tuck the shoulder in tight. I have the bow here, and I push and pull just like that.
Yeah. There's some standard ways of pulling your bow, but there's also a lot of people that deviate, I guess I would say, or have their different variations. If you can pull back a bow, then that's good, and do it.
Yeah, for me, it's like it's just instinctive to do it that way.
Yeah.
I don't get fatigued. I can do it over and over again. I also want to be able to draw my bow really slow. And that's a controlled draw.
Right.
And sometimes, like right now, I always have an 80-pound bow at the house, 80 plus. So when I'm drawing that bow, I have the most leverage and power in that power band, in that space of muscle movement, you know. And so pushing like that and pulling just a little bit, mostly staying anchored and then pulling through just at the end. I don't know. I don't do the high pull. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it doesn't cause me any discomfort, and I can do it over and over again, and I can do it in a real controlled way.
No, that's good. And you're successful with it. So that's what counts.
Yeah.
I think, so where I think this is, thanks for having me on, because I think this is a big topic that I see a lot as a physical therapist working with archers, is just shoulder pain. So you say, like, we'll say the bow arm is the arm that's holding the bow.
Yep. Okay.
Versus the drawing arm, obviously the arm has the
drawing
release
the
on
bow.
it that's drawing the bow. And I'll see pain and dysfunction in both of those arms. So I'll see a lot more. You asked me what is the main thing that I see. I see a lot of rotator cuff pain, we'll say.
Which is?
So the rotator cuff are the 4 specific muscles, very small muscles.
In the shoulder socket.
Yep. Yeah. And what I wanted to get into, and this is the whole purpose of those rotator cuff muscles. So there's 4 of them, and the whole purpose is to actually provide some stability to the glenohumeral joint, so your whole shoulder joint. Mm-hmm. The shoulder joint is very interesting because it is very mobile.
Yeah.
We have 180 degrees
it's
of
crazy.
motion in multiple planes. They kind of use the analogy of a golf ball on a tee. The glenoid, which is the scapula, the scapular part, is 3 or 4 times smaller than the actual head of the humerus. So that's the head of the humerus. Your shoulder is like the golf ball sitting on the tee. So you have this mobility, right?
Right.
But you have to have this stability, and that's where archery, I think, is such a interesting sport, because you have to have the mobility first. You also have to have the stability of those rotator cuff muscles. So that rotator cuff muscle, what it does is actually provide some stability. So it draws that humerus into the glenoid or into that socket, but then it also pulls the net force of those muscles. So biomechanically speaking, it draws it inferiorly like this, so that you can rotate, in multiple planes.
So for those that are listening, it sort of separates a little bit from the socket.
Yeah. It draws it into the socket, but then pulls it inferiorly so it doesn't get any of this superior migration up into some of the different bones.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where you hear the term a lot, impingement. So people will be like, yeah, I've got the shoulder impingement, and I don't love using that term, because what it does for a lot of people is puts in their mind that 2 things are rubbing on each other, or 2 bones are compressing on each other, and you have to remove that for it to get better, which is not the case. I mean 65 to 70% of shoulder injury shoulder pain revolves around the rotator cuff muscles. And it's not necessarily that there's an impingement there. It could be that there's some degenerative tearing. So as we age, we just get some more micro tears in those muscles. Same thing with the back and things like that. Those things just, wear down.
So one thing I've observed, and this was true for myself as well, after years of just doing what I do normally. I played basketball a lot, a few nights a week. I did some triathlon stuff. I didn't really work on any kind of mobility, flexibility at all. I just did my sports kind of stuff. Whatever range of motion and whatever strength I had came from just doing my activities.
Yeah.
Right. And then I spent a lot of time sitting at a desk, when I wasn't doing active things. Fast forward, I'm 35 or so, 36. I'm dabbling in some CrossFit. I got over some of the back issues that I had, getting fitter. What I found was shoulder mobility was really limited. Like things I can do now with my shoulders are night and day to where in my mid-30s what I could do with my shoulders. And whatever mobility I had throughout my life, it was pretty limited. So I couldn't even raise my arms straight up, like it would come to here.
Really?
I couldn't reach behind my back and touch my hands together and do this. I couldn't move my shoulders back. They were just here, and I couldn't touch my hands unless I bent my elbows. And so I would grab back here like this, and I would slowly over time try to get my shoulders to loosen. My dad's like that too. I think there's a genetic tendency within our family to have real tight shoulders. Slowly, I started to try to get that mobility because I would try to do like a snatch, get the bar, and anytime I had to hold the bar over my head and then squat with it, I just would fall forward. I don't have the flexibility in my thoracic spine, my upper half of my back, or my shoulders, and so I'm very flexible, fairly flexible below, like my ankle and hip mobility is usually good and all of that, but from the chest up, pretty bad. So I've had to regain that. And what I did, what's helped the most was Olympic rings, basically beginning to do like skin the cat in under scale, and maybe even with a rubber band or something helping me. And I would start doing exercises that would take me to the ends of these ranges of motion under load.
Right.
And bring me back, and I did that. And at first, I remember the first time I tried to do a muscle up, I thought I was going to rip my tendons in my chest and my elbows. I thought I was going to really hurt something. Now I have all that strength where I can just pull up, do multiple muscle ups. I can do a skin the cat, or, I can do these different moves on the rings. I can pull all the way through, hang straight down, with my feet touching, and then I can pull myself back through.
That's good.
Under load, and that started to really increase my range of motion in my shoulder, and it also removed a lot of the aches and pain I would have when I would do certain movements like the snatch.
Yeah, right.
And so that's kind of what I did, and I did a lot of pull-ups as well. I had read a number of fitness things because I was like, why pull-ups? Why? And they were showing like a gymnastic pull-up where I had good positioning on the bar and maybe even a false grip. And as I pull through, my elbows stay forward. They don't flare out to the side. I don't pull up like this. And these movements were, they said, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, but somehow it stabilized the shoulder joint. Being able to have a strong pull-up helps stabilize that shoulder joint so that when I am holding up a bar overhead, they're like people who just work on the snatch but don't do pull-ups. They can have a wiggly or shaky stability back there, even though they have a lot of strength, because that pull-up muscle does something, the pull-up motion and movement does something to stabilize the scapula in that movement pattern. And so it's really healthy to have a good, strong pull-up that's done with the right form.
Yeah.
So those are all the things I started implementing, just trying to make sure I'm moving well so that I'm basically getting as much range of motion as I can and strength through that full range of motion. Again, most of this is only done because I want to avoid injury.
Yeah.
That's it. Like I don't necessarily care if I can do a pull up when I'm hiking in the mountains and hunting elk or whatever, but I don't want to get hurt.
Yeah.
And so it all translates though, because same with the deadlift, I got to pick up an elk and drag it hind quarter over someplace. I don't want to throw my back out.
Yeah.
So these things done in the gym are just movements that I can transfer outside. But my whole point was these are the things I did to get better movement patterns and then stronger shoulder joint, more flexibility. What are the things that you do?
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, the shoulder joint needs that mobility. So that's what you worked on with all those different maneuvers, which is great. So that shoulder joint needs the mobility, whether you're stretching or you're up against the wall and you're stretching. A lot of people have tight lats and then a tight posterior cuff.
And when you say up against the wall, like they lean against the wall, their back is against the wall, head against the wall, and they put their hands up. And the question is, can they touch the wall?
Can they touch the wall? Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't even close.
Yeah.
I remember when they did this, here, let's test your mobility. And I was like, whoa, I'm jacked up.
Yep. Yeah, so you can do a lot of overhead mobility exercises.
Backing up, though, before you move on, you said, your words were, mobility is important. You need that mobility. Why? Why is that important?
Yeah, so because of the range of motion we have in that specific joint, you need the mobility to be able to first, I mean, obviously reaching overhead requires so much mobility, reaching behind you, drawing your bow back requires so much mobility. And you need the mobility in multiple planes. So not just lifting your arm in front of you or just lifting your arm to the side, but these rotational planes as well. And that's where that rotator cuff really comes into play, are those rotational planes. And so you'll see a lot of people doing, and like on my website, I've got some exercises and some blog posts on some specific exercises you can do, but there are some specific rotator cuff exercises that I give to probably 99% of my patients that have shoulder pain, because they're not doing them, because they want to go to the gym and they want to do the bench press, they want to do they want to do curls. They want to do curls, they want to do pull-ups, lat pull-downs, whatever it is, snatches, cleans, which are all good, but without that stable base, or without that. So we're saying someone has the mobility now, and now we're trying to work on that stability of that rotator cuff. I don't think people do that as much. They get the mobility, and then they go right to the fun stuff, the snatches, the cleans, the Olympic bars, everything like that, the rings.
I agree.
You have to have that foundation.
I would go into the gym and people would just want to get their pull-ups in. And I can see them hanging on their shoulder socket joint. Like they grab the bar, and one of the things that they do is when they grab the bar, their shoulders aren't set. Their shoulders pop up like this around their ears, like a shirt being pulled overhead. Yeah. And their socket just goes whoop, slides right up there, and they're hanging on their ligaments instead of in their joints, instead of hanging like with active muscle. And they're like, well, if they hang like that, they can actually, and then they wiggle or kip, they can get themselves up. And so they start doing pull-ups that way. And it makes me cringe every time. And in fact, I used to do the same thing, right? I'm just in high school, college, you just hang on those joints, drop to the bottom, like just eke your way up, shoulders, elbows flared, really ugly, fish on a hook, pull up. And I could crank out 15 or 25. I can't do that many doing an honest pull-up now, doing it the form that I know I should.
Wasn't that part of like the gym standard test you had to do? Yes. How many pull-ups or something? And then how far you could reach? and what I noticed was I had a lot of rhomboid pain and upper neck issues when I was doing pull-ups with poor form. And when I stopped hanging on those joints and those ligaments, my socket, and I started being active, engaging my lats, all of that, and pulling through with good form, like I could start stacking pull-ups and pull-up workouts into my routine and go home and not have chronic soreness. Yeah. And before that, it seemed like just didn't matter. I was always really sore from any pull-up workout. I just wasn't using the right muscles. Right. Yeah. Doing pull-ups correctly, but really just, having that stable base is super important. So that stable base of those rotator cuff muscles, again, that's what I give. And so when I started up my clinic here, started working with a lot of bow hunters, I would go to the range and people would all the time complain of, I would just be shooting my bow there. And they're like, yeah, I've got this shoulder issue. They're not even talking to me. They're talking to their buddies. And they're like, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, I'm going to go get an MRI, or I'm going to go have surgery, or whatever it is. And I'm like, have you tried any specific exercises? And the majority of people I realized weren't doing exercises like those basic rotator cuff stuff. So you'll see a lot of times I give my patients this basic stuff to begin with to kind of prime those muscles. And then that provides a good stable base so that they can do proper pull-ups, so that so I'm sure you did something similar, so you can do proper pull-ups and then you're not sore. And that's what I see a lot of, is people who are sore, who have, shoulder pain or persistent shoulder pain, and then they get on a good program and that alleviates that, is mitigated.
Well, it's like rowing. You can row with your shoulders out of socket, rolled forward, compromise, and pull. And you can repeat that on a rowing machine over and over and really make yourself sore. Right. Or you can have your shoulders pinned, be in a healthy position, pull with strength, and you can strengthen. The activity of rowing is occurring in both situations. But one situation, you're strengthening muscles, you're reinforcing good movement patterns, and the other one, you're compromising everything. Right. You're on the road to injury. You're chronically sore, and you're not getting stronger in a way that is going to prevent you from getting injured later.
Right.
The same thing with a deadlift. I see the same thing. Yep. You round your shoulders because a row machine is like a deadlift, but sitting down,
Yeah, exactly.
Lighter weight. The same thing happens. They roll their shoulders, maybe even bend their back, arch their back instead of a flat back, and then they pull that bar up and they stand it up. Versus the guy that has them pinned, back is flat, pulls the bar up. Both are getting the bar off the ground and up to your waist. But one is doing it in a compromised way that's going to cause problems downstream. That's going to leave you chronically sore. Yep. And then one is really much more efficient too and doesn't leave you sore. Efficiency is important. Like I did a workout the other day with intern Brad. He was here, nice. Brad Hunt, and we were in the gym together. And it was like 90 burpees. It was built into this workout. It was like 15 and then another movement, 15 burpees back and forth. And I looked at his burpee technique. It's not efficient. When he does 100 burpees and I do 100 burpees, we both got ourselves down and up the same number of times. Yep. But I was not tired, and I could probably do another 200 at that same pace before I felt what he was feeling at 100 because I move far more efficiently because I practiced this. So my whole body is engaged in good movement patterns. I'm not leaking energy at all. Everything I move is really efficient. I don't do anything extra than I have to. I don't exert the same energy to do the same movement. And I think that if you keep practicing the way Brad does it and you don't become more efficient, what you end up with is you get stronger and you get fitter, but you're not maximizing your ability to do that activity as efficiently as I am. And so when you translate that to hunting, if I can climb the mountain using, 30 or 40% less energy because of my efficient movement, or usually coming down the mountain is where that efficiency really comes into play, in my opinion. Yeah, I can move down the mountain with good movement in a way that's really efficient. I don't burn the energy and the legs and all of that because I have good, efficient movement. So efficiency matters. I think that's one case for talking people into doing some of these things is fitness isn't just getting stronger. It's becoming more efficient. That means you do it right.
Good movement patterns.
Yeah.
No, if you're more effective, more efficient, we're saying moving down the mountain, then you can translate that over into other activities, whether you're hiking more, further, same thing. If we translate that over to the shoulder and drawing a bow back, the less efficient you are at it, then you're going to be able to draw that bow back fewer times.
Yeah.
Or cause an injury, then
then you
set yourself back. Exactly. Yeah. Then you're out. Back. And so being efficient with those movement patterns is critical. Being efficient. So again, I'll go back to the strength component of that rotator cuff is so important. The strength component of the entire body and moving efficiently is important. That's what I see a lot of.
So what are some exercises that you said there were, I think you said 4 or?
Yeah. So the rotator cuff is a series of 4 muscles.
And then you have some exercises associated with that that people can do to sort of strengthen their shoulder.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And have you used, just as a side note, like in one of the gyms I was at years ago, they have those rubber bands, shoulder that come off the wall. They have all the rubber band movements and stuff that you go through to strengthen your shoulder. And then one of the CrossFit gyms I was in, it was like, it went across the wall. There's like 7 stations and there was a board that showed you, and there were different tension rubber bands and handles on them. And you were to do all sorts of sort of mobility work. So rather than just kind of stretching, which is the common, hey, you want to get more mobile, you stretch. It's like, no, actually you need to do exercises to get more flexible.
Right. Yeah. And there are, so the posterior rotator cuff, we're going to break it down into the anterior rotator cuff and the posterior rotator cuff. The posterior rotator cuff, our are mainly your external rotators. So with your elbow to your side and you're pushing out, so your wrist out to the side, that's external rotation. That can get tight. And there are some very good specific stretches, or you'll see people using the tennis ball on their shoulder blade right there, right? And kind of massaging that, or kind of doing some soft tissue release.
Tennis balls for weak people.
Lacrosse balls.
Lacrosse balls for the real tough guys.
You must use a lacrosse ball. So those are some different ways of addressing that posterior rotator cuff, the soft tissue. And then there's some good stretches that you can do. Specific exercises with your arm pegged to your side. If we're working on that posterior rotator cuff and we just want to work on external rotation, then it's just elbow to your side, pushing out. And that's great to target, let's see, the supraspinatus muscle, the infraspinatus muscle, and the teres minor muscle, which are your 3 of your rotator cuff muscles. The other one...
So how do you do that exercise? Like with a rubber band or something?
With a rubber band, yeah.
Okay. So
or lying on your side with a weight.
With a weight, I see. And you're basically raising the weight from the floor upward. And giving yourself that external rotation where the arm moves away from the body, the hand moves away from the body.
Right, exactly. So then the other one for that subscapularis muscle, which I think of these muscles, Brian, as I'm cleaning out an elk or a deer.
Yeah.
I need to get a couple more so I can do this more often. But when you're cleaning out when you're breaking down the deer and elk,
taking the quarters off,
say that front quarter, how easy does that come off?
It's weirdly easy.
Yeah.
Like it's not even connected, it seems. Yeah. It's just some weird muscles up there.
It's just muscles that are attaching it. There's one attachment to the axial skeleton, we'll say. The rest of it is all muscular attachment. And it's the same thing goes for us. We look just the same as an elk or a deer, but so it's all muscular. And so that other exercise is that backside of that scapula that sits against the thoracic spine where it pulls inward. And so the same exercise pushing out.
So internal rotation.
You're going to internal rotation with the band pulling inward towards your chest there. Yeah. And those are great. I mean, those are great starting points. Like I said, I give those to the majority of my patients just to say, hey, before you go do the fun stuff, the bench and the curls and everything else, start with 15, 20 repetitions, lightweight, of just the band work, just to kind of prime those muscles, get the circulation flowing, basically. Yeah. So, yeah, interesting. Those are great exercises. You can challenge yourself that way by this might be putting me out of a job if I give away all these exercises, but no, is then getting yourself up into 90 degrees, right? And then doing the same thing, some rotation up in this position or pulling inward as well. And then what I like to do typically after that is combine motions. So that's where you're starting to work on a lot of scapular strength. So maybe the band is around your wrist as you're reaching up in the sky. So now you're getting combined shoulder flexion and rotation. And so there's a lot of ways to vary that. There's a lot of ways that each person needs something a little bit differently. Yeah.
Now, I say this to people when I'm teaching them how to do a squat.
Yeah.
It's like they got to find their butt again because they don't know how to activate it. Like there's this disconnect between their mind, their brain, and telling which muscles to activate.
Yeah.
And do you find that when people do these exercises, like with these rubber bands, because I can see myself going, oh, okay, that's the muscle that should be firing when I do this movement. But sometimes you're not. You're using your bicep to do things or something else. And it's like, oh, no, there's this muscle here. I can't even – it's like our minds, we're not aware of which ones we're activating, even though we're doing the same movement. It's back to what I said earlier about doing like a row, with your shoulders rounded and stuff. You're doing all kinds of different muscles activating, not necessarily the ones you want.
Right.
And it's sometimes I think you just got to connect your mind to that muscle.
Yeah, very much so. So you'll see people with all sorts of compensatory movement strategies. The one that I see a lot of when they're trying to work out their rotator cuff, we'll say, is instead of going straight to the side, what they'll do is they'll start trying to get their tricep involved.
Right.
So they're just doing some tricep extension, or they're rotating their whole entire body. And
when I see that, I ask people, I say, okay, lower the weight.
Yeah.
Like the reason you're compensating is because you really don't have the muscle to do this movement, or you're instinctively moving to compensate because this is hard. Maybe lower the resistance,
right,
and do it the correct way. It's like a pull-up when I teach someone who can crank out like 15 pull-ups, and I'm like, okay, but now do it without having your neck bent back and your arms flared out. Like do it elbows forward and pull straight up. And then they're like, and they can barely get one or two out. And it's like, hey, here's a rubber band. And they're just insulted because they're like, dude, yes, you can get your chin over the bar and keep wrecking things.
Yep.
Or you can retrain your body to do it in the right way and just check your ego at the door. Lower the weight, do what you need to do it right, and develop the strength. Long term, you're going to be in a whole better place.
Have you ever thought of a career in physical therapy?
I wanted to open a CrossFit gym and do it. I really did. But it, different path. I really love this stuff.
No, I think you're good at it, and I think that's what's important is finding those good movement patterns, making sure that you're teaching people the right movement patterns, because that's what you will see is people. I give them an exercise band, and they get offended. They're like, I can bench 250 pounds, whatever, right? But you'll see them compensate, and it's not about, with these muscles, it's not about lifting a lot of weight. It's about working on them. They're very small, and they work on stability. And so it's working through high number of repetitions for these patients, for patients that have any shoulder injury like that or pain, to work on that stability so they can have good form and be efficient.
Yeah. It shocked me when I started working on, for instance, with the back pain, I was doing the McKenzie method stuff. It blew my mind that such a simple, basic exercise a few times a day started to really fix my problems. Like, what is that about? Like, I can squat or do this XYZ thing. This seems awful trivial.
Yeah.
But it taught me that it's not trivial. It's a big deal.
Yeah. And these exercises for the rotator cuff, some say they're trivial. I mean, they're weirdly hard as well. I mean, if you really isolate and you're really focused on them and you get a resistance band, like you can really actually fatigue pretty quickly. And so they're easy exercises, but it's actually a little bit, it's weirdly difficult, I'll say.
Well, I told you how I tried to do rings the first time. My brother-in-law was a beast on these rings. He'd been doing them for about a year, and I'm like, I do P90X 5 days a week. I can do this,
Right.
I remember getting on the rings and feeling like, just getting into the dip position, I felt like I was going to tear some tissue.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, and I was shaking everywhere, and I went down. I'm like, they felt like they were going to shoot out, and then I was going to rip something open. And so I remember getting off the rings going, I am not equipped for this. And I remember doing basic movements like, okay, can I just sit on a pair of bars, and just hold myself? And then can I lower myself and just sit there, and then started to push up a little bit. Once I got really good at a bar that's fixed, then I moved onto the rings which move all over the place.
Right.
And then I just tried to do some basic dips, not real deep. And you work your way up over time to be able to do these. It takes patience.
Yeah, it does.
I remember the first time I had tried to do a handstand push-up, got over my head, and I was like, I felt like my head was going to explode. My eyeballs or blood vessels were going to burst out. Just being upside down, I was like, oh my gosh, this is awful. Let alone do a push-up, with it. And then, of course, I did it anyway because I wanted to. And then I tweaked something right here behind the shoulder and the rhomboid and the neck. And I'm like, oh gosh, what was that? And realized, again, maybe I should start working with some light dumbbells, pushing them overhead, before I go and do my whole body weight.
Yeah, exactly.
But I find it fun. I find all of this kind of the scaling to where I can do it well with good form always leads down the road to greater and greater strength over time.
It's life lessons, progress, right? The small small things.
What happens if a guy has something torn, though, or wrecked inside their shoulder? Can they rehab it with physical therapy, or do they need to get in there and have something cut open?
Yeah.
Like, what do you recommend there?
I recommend staying away from the scalpel as long as you can.
Yeah.
And there are some instances where, surgery is needed.
Mm-hmm.
However, we have there's some good studies out there that really pinpoint that people have, they'll have full thickness rotator cuff tears. So we'll break down rotator cuff tears into partial thickness or full thickness.
Okay.
And when someone hears the term, this goes back to another podcast we were talking about with MRIs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when they get an MRI and they hear the term tear or they see that, it's not necessarily like a piece of paper that is ripped in half.
Right.
You have let's say your muscle is, we'll say, this thick, so there's some thickness to it as well. So it's not just going to rip all the way in half this way. It's lengthwise and then widthwise, heighthwise. It may have some fraying on the underneath portion of it, where you'd have some of these partial thickness tears.
Okay. I understand.
Very rarely, what I would say, do we see full thickness tears. Even in those patients that have full thickness tears, you'd be surprised that a lot of them, so they have a full thickness tear, they get an MRI, I guess, and then they are shown they have a full thickness tear, and they still have really good mobility. They still have good range of motion, and maybe they're compensating with other muscles, and you'll see some then funky movement patterns at that point, but they're not painful. So to answer your question, no, if you have a full thickness tear, if you have rotator cuff tears, the first line of defense is exercise, is strengthening it, working on these very basic foundational exercises, mobility. Soft tissue work also does help and take away some of the pain. And so there's a lot of things that you can do besides just going right to surgery.
Okay. So, circling back to the bow discussion, what do you, as a doctor, having dealt with this with a lot of different individuals, what do you think is causing the problem specifically with archers? What is it is it some way that is it how they're drawing the bow? We didn't get into how you draw a bow. How do you do it, and how you help these people that are compromised still hunt, still be able to do archery? Yeah.
So I draw my bow typically with a high elbow. So I'll put my hand placement on my grip, have very light or little grip pressure there, so I'm not getting any of this hand torque. And then I'll draw back where I'm kind of using my rhomboids there to get me back into position. So I'm doing, some
I've
pushing.
done that too.
I think I'm probably doing more pulling, though. It'd be interesting to observe each other, because I probably been doing a lot more pulling here with a higher elbow. And I see a lot of people, like I said, I like to see some good form when they're drawing their bow. But if you can draw a bow, that's what I want to see.
When I was a kid and I wasn't very strong, and I didn't have a recurve, I didn't have a compound, I had a recurve, and then later I did get a compound. I still did the same thing. When I was a kid, the arrow was pointed in the air like this, right? And I was pulling down kind of like you would a pull up or chin up, and I was like, and you do this, right? It's like, that's how I could get the bow back as a little kid.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, my dad was cool with that. That's kind of how I learned. And I could get those heavier poundage bows pulled back by doing that. But the whole time my arrow is pointed at the sky. It's pointed everywhere, but necessarily where I want the arrow to go. Right. I lost more than a few arrows, skyward due to that thing. And you slip or whatever. I was between 8 and 14 shooting like a recurve bow. Now I put the arrow right where I want it to go. If it accidentally goes off, it still goes in that direction.
Right.
Yeah. But there was a time where I kind of had maybe that elbow a little high and would pull through, as I bring the bow downward.
Yeah. And what I see a lot of people over bowing themselves, right? Or I'll use that term where they think it's cool to have a 80-pound. I don't shoot an 80-pound draw weight. I don't shoot an 80-pound bow.
Yep.
Just because I'm not as big. I'm not as I'm not as strong as you. And so I don't do that. But some people see that and they're like, I want to go to 80 pounds, or I want that speed of that arrow to be 340 feet per second, or,
Yep.
and so they'll overbow themselves. And then that's where I'll see a lot of these things break down, just like lifting weights.
Yep.
I mean, and that's the same thing.
And for me, the only reason I do it is because I can't really tell the difference between 70 and 80. It feels pretty much real similar. So I'm like, why not have the extra power? But I do enjoy practicing a lot with an 80-pound bow and then hunt with a 70-pound bow.
Yeah.
Because I'm so used to the resistance at that higher poundage that when I step down, it really is like I can draw super slow and controlled when I switch to the hunting rig. So I like to have the 80 just for conditioning and practice. I will hunt animals like elk with the 80-pound bow, hunts where I'm on the ground, especially when it's September or if I'm shooting longer range. I like it.
That 80-pound, yeah.
I do not like shooting an 80-pound bow in the dead of winter in a tree stand and it's snowing and I'm wearing 10 pairs of clothes and I've got a glove on, and all of that stuff makes the whole thing so much harder.
Yeah.
And it's not really the tool for the job.
Yeah.
With all the clothes on, it's shockingly difficult for me to draw a bow the same way when I'm covered in heavy clothing. It's amazing how much it adds more resistance to the whole thing.
Right. And maybe that 80-pound bow is just having a higher holding weight.
Yeah.
Right? So they have different let-offs.
Even then, the holding weight's so minimal.
It is.
Because of the way the bows are engineered nowadays, that the holding weight doesn't bother me too much.
Doesn't it?
But the draw can get me a little bit once it's that heavy.
Yeah.
Now for me, when I have a bow in hand, you asked, does my shoulder hurt? It doesn't, but now and then I will get pain on my bow arm, right in here around my elbow. And I believe that's just from having a bow that's a bit heavy. I've noticed having and shooting as much as I do, having weight on the bow, a back bar and a front bar and so on. When I have my fixed pin sights on the bow, I can run the quiver kind of angled just right and get a really good balance out of the bow.
Yeah. When
I run my Garmin Zero sight, it's got batteries in it.
Right.
It's a little bigger. It sticks out to the side quite a bit. I have to run a back bar to balance that and to make it shoot dead on for me, which just raises the overall weight of the bow just a little bit.
Right.
And I can find myself getting fatigued shooting that bow if I do tack or something, or I'm shooting a lot. I can feel my shoulder and my arm just getting a little tired. It takes quite a bit, but I can feel it there.
Yeah.
But never my shoulder and the pulling.
Yeah, and I posted something recently about a good shoulder. So I'll talk about your elbow, but for that, I love exercises for people who are shooting a bow, for bow hunters and archers. I'll work out both shoulders equally because you do need to have that stability. And so there are a lot of exercises where you can hold your bow or you can hold a weight and you can have someone kind of pushing the weight around. So like you're,
stabilizing,
like you're in a windy situation
with your bow arm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're just stabilizing that, or just go, I guess, out west and and shoot your bow. But you can use it as a weight, and then you're just stabilizing and working on those stabilizers. Where I'll see a lot of people, and this has been actually a pretty common occurrence, a lot of people having elbow pain.
Yep.
Whether they're gripping their bow too much, or they're doing other activities and causing some sort of tendinopathy or a tendinitis there. Like lateral epicondylitis is the term we'll typically use, or a tennis elbow. I had this thing that I was been writing up about archer's elbow, which is very similar there. So this just from gripping there too much, you can get some pain there through those muscles. So the treatment for that, one of the best exercises, is doing a lot of heavy resistance or eccentric workout. And we've talked about that before, but eccentrics to really load those tendons and get some lengthening of that whole fascia, the fascial tissues as well.
So I had a buddy who had that problem for a long time, for years. And he used floss, like the rubber tape or whatever, wrapped it around there tight and around there tight, and then did the eccentric exercises you're talking about. But he wrapped the floss around there, just, I don't know, smashing those muscles. And after a few months of that, completely cured a problem he'd had for 10 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, so that's a good way of doing it. I've seen, I've done a lot of dry needling on that area, and that tends to help as well. But that area does seem to respond pretty well to soft tissue work, mobilizations, other things like that. But probably the bread and butter, though, are those eccentric exercises, just loading that tissue up.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, though, is typically if I talk to my patients who come to me and they say, hey, I'm shooting my bow, but it hurts when I'm holding my bow, hurts right there on that elbow. I'll typically ask them, what are you doing? And the majority of them are not doing any shoulder workout, or they're doing pull-ups and stuff like that, but they're not doing any of those basic, again, back to the basic exercises, those rotator cuff strengthening exercises. So that's where, even for elbow pain, people going up the chain to the shoulder, it's critical for us bow hunters. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, this has been a really good discussion. I think there's going to be a lot of guys with some follow-up questions.
Yeah.
They can get a hold of you at Mountain Physio.
Yep.
MTN. Is it underscore?
On Instagram, MTN_physio, PHYSIO. My website is www.mountainphysio.com. No underscore, no space.
We'll put the link in the description of the video as well, so people can go there and get in contact with you. Yeah. Especially if they live in the Utah area, because you're not too far from here.
No.
You're right here in Salt Lake, basically.
Yeah. Right here in the hub, I guess, of a lot of
bow hunters.
Hunters. Exactly.
Yeah. So they can reach out to you to start working on if they've got some issues. I agree with staying out of surgery as much as possible.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times it's just correct those movement patterns, give yourself time, and the human body can really fix itself.
Yeah.
It's better at fixing itself than the doctor is with a knife.
With a knife, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's cool, I've got a bunch of some programs up on my website and everything like that, and really try to get an individual program for each person. And so...
And they can reach out to you digitally as well, and you can work with them.
Yeah.
We live in a new world today.
We do, yeah. And I've had some good success that way with people elsewhere in the country who are reaching out to me and say, hey, help me with this specific issue. And so,
yeah, I really think that, shooting a bow is just such an awesome thing to do.
It is, yeah.
It's therapeutic. It's fun. The older I get, the more I see people give up too soon. Mm-hmm. They give up on everything.
Yeah.
Things get hard. They're like, I quit doing squats because it hurts. I quit doing this because it hurts. I quit shooting a bow because my shoulder hurts. And I'd rather, if I had anything to say, it would be, don't give up. Like, find a way. Work on it. You got lots of repetitions, lots of cycles through that shoulder. At 45, you're not done yet.
Yeah, right.
You have more gas in the tank. You just need the right tools, and you just need to do the right things, and you'll be back.
Yeah. And that's Gritty. That's my goal with my business I think archery is probably one of the best sports out there. It's fun. It's therapeutic. Like you said, it's challenging. There's a strength component. There's also a very big mental and, component that way. And then you add hunting into it, and that's just a whole nother level. But I enjoy it. And I think most people that do it, they enjoy it as well. And they don't want to give it up and go to a crossbow, or they don't want to give it up and stop bow hunting at all. I mean, it's a fun sport, and there's no reason why that you shouldn't be able to do that for the rest of your life. It's just fun.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Folks, thanks for tuning in to the podcast. Like we said, check out the description field in this video. Go to our website, briancall.com. You can find all our content there. And don't forget to support our partners. Use the code GRITTY at Mountain Ops, and you'll get free shipping, which is great. And use the code Heather's Choice. Use the code GRITTY. Get 15% off there. Get yourself some sissy sticks. We got stuff going on with Valkyrie Archery. You can get 5% off some sweet broadheads and gear there. Check all those places out. Check out Seek Outside for tents, shelters, teepees, and stoves for all you backcountry folks. And check out Graxall Game Bags as well for some sweet little game bags for the backcountry. Thanks for tuning in. Stay gritty, folks.